The lamp is low. The rain has paused. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticks past midnight. Welcome to the late reader. Pull the blanket up. Let the dark settle in. Tonight, we read old horror by a single light until sleep finally arrives.
The rain had turned the county road into a creek by the time my father's old army buddy, Don Morris, pulled his truck into our gravel drive. Inside, the house was warm and dry. My dad and I were killing time over a checkers board while my mother sat in her recliner with half a scarf looped over her knees, pretending not to watch the game. Dad had his king cornered again by a move he should have seen 3 turns back, and I was about to give him grief for it when the back door banged open and Don filled the doorway.
"Road's a river out there," he said, stamping his boots. "You people really chose the spot, didn't you?" Dad grinned and got up to take his coat. "It's cheap and quiet, mostly quiet."
Don had been back from overseas about a year, and the army had left him bigger and rougher than I remembered, with a face that looked like he'd been places he didn't talk about at dinner. We sat him by the wood stove, and Dad poured bourbon into chipped coffee mugs, and after the second drink, Don started talking. He talked about heat and dust and markets where nothing good was for sale, and my mother listened the way she always did, with her hands folded and her eyes soft. That was when Dad brought it up.
Don's mouth tightened. "Nothing. Forget it. Monkey's paw," my mother said. Don turned the mug in his hands. "It's just a story," he said, but he didn't sound like he believed it. "A little dried paw. Mummified, I guess. Some holy man put a spell on it years ago. Said it would grant 3 men 3 wishes each, to prove that fate does what it wants, and people who mess with it pay for it."
I laughed. My mother made a small disgusted noise. But Don didn't laugh. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a handkerchief and set it on the arm of the chair. When he unfolded the cloth, there it was, brown and curled and awful, with dried knuckles and nails like yellow chips. "Jesus," I said. Dad picked it up. "It weighed almost nothing. And you're saying it works." "It worked for me," Don said quietly. "And it—"
"If you already used your 3, Dad said slowly, "then what are you keeping it for?" Don looked at the stove. "I was going to sell it. Couldn't find a buyer who didn't want to try it first. Some people think it's a joke. Some people know better." Dad turned it over in his palm. "And if you had another 3 wishes?" Don didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't know. I really don't."
He stood up, took the paw from my father's hand, and before any of us could move, tossed it onto the hot coals in the stove. My dad shouted and lunged forward and pulled it out, the handkerchief scorching, the paw somehow untouched. "Are you insane?" Dad said, waving it to cool it. "Burn it," Don told him. "That's the sensible thing. If you don't want it," Dad said, "give it to me." "I threw it in the fire," Don said. "If you keep it, that's on you."
He stayed for supper, but the mood had shifted, and by the time his truck coughed to life in the driveway, the paw had been forgotten again in the back and forth of ordinary talk. When I walked him out, he caught my arm in the dark. "Don't let him wish for anything stupid," he said. I laughed. "He won't wish at all. He doesn't believe in it." Don looked past me at the house, the yellow window, my father's shadow moving inside. "He believes enough," he said. When I came back in, Dad had the paw out on the kitchen table, turning it under the light. "How do you do it again?" he asked.
"You hold it up," I said, "and wish out loud." That's what he said. My mother got up to clear the dishes. "If it works," she said, "wish me 4 more hands so I can finish this housework." Dad held the paw up like a man trying not to feel foolish, and I sat down at the piano in the corner and hit a couple of low chords for effect. "I wish for $200,000, he said. The piano string buzzed, and at the same instant my father cried out and dropped the paw. It hit the table and lay still. "It moved," he said. His face had gone gray. Right when I wished, it twisted.
I picked it up. It felt like old leather and nothing else. "I don't see the money," I said, "and I don't think I ever will." My mother rubbed his shoulder. "It was your imagination, Tom." He shook his head. "No, it moved."
We went to bed not long after, and I lay awake a while watching the stove through my bedroom vent. Somewhere around midnight I thought I heard Dad moving downstairs, but I was half asleep and didn't think much of it. The wind picked up. A branch scraped the siding. I dreamed of the paw, except in the dream it was my own hand, the fingers curling and uncurling, while something whispered from inside the walls.
The next morning, the sun was so bright and ordinary that the whole thing felt ridiculous. Dad had thrown the paw on top of the microwave like it was a dried root he'd found in the yard. My mother made pancakes and teased him about being a superstitious old man, and I ate fast because I had to make the early shift at the distribution center. "Don't spend my inheritance before I get home," I said, grabbing my keys. Dad flipped a pancake. "I'll try to restrain myself."
My mother walked me to the door and stood on the porch in her robe, waving as I backed down the drive. I thought about the paw for maybe 5 seconds, decided it was a party trick or Don's idea of a joke, and then forgot about it until the middle of the afternoon. I was at work when it happened, though of course I didn't know that then. What I knew came later, from the man in the gray suit who stood at our front gate for almost 5 minutes before he worked up the courage to open it.
My mother told me about it that night in the hospital waiting room, before we even understood the shape of what we'd lost. The man had come from the warehouse. He'd sat in our kitchen with his hat in his hands and told them I'd been pulled into the conveyor, that I wasn't in pain, that the company admitted no liability, that they were very sorry, that they wished to present my parents with a certain sum. My father had asked, in a voice my mother said didn't sound like his. "How much?" The man said. $200,000.
My father put his hands out in front of him like a blind man reaching for a door, and then he folded onto the linoleum.
They buried me 2 days later. I know this because I watched them from the edge of the cemetery, though I don't understand how. I stood under an oak tree, in clothes I didn't remember putting on, and I watched them lower the box into the ground, and I wanted to call out to my mother, but my throat made no sound. When the last car pulled away, I walked home through the fields. It took hours. The sky was dark by the time I reached the house, and when I put my hand on the doorknob, it passed through the wood like smoke.
After that, things got worse for them in ways I could feel but couldn't stop. The house went quiet in a way houses aren't supposed to. My mother stopped knitting, my father stopped shaving, they moved through the rooms like people waiting for a second blow, and when it didn't come, they only sat down harder in their chairs and stared at nothing. A week passed, maybe more. Time felt different on my side of things. I tried to touch the coffee maker once, and my fingers went through it, and a picture fell off the wall.
I was in the hall when I heard her voice from the bedroom, high and strange. "The paw," she was saying. "Tom, the monkey's paw." My father murmured something. "It's still here, isn't it?" she said. "You didn't burn it? It's on the microwave," he said. "Why?" She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "The other 2 wishes. We've only used one. Margaret, go down and get it. Wish our boy back. Wish Herb back, Tom. Bring him home."
I felt the temperature in the house drop. I wanted to tell them no, to throw the thing in the stove and bolt the door, but when I opened my mouth, the only sound was the wind moving through the empty rooms. My father came downstairs in his robe, slow and heavy, and took the paw from the microwave. He stood in the kitchen in the dark, and I stood beside him, inches away, and I watched him raise it. "Don't," I tried to say. "I wish my son alive again," he whispered.
The paw fell from his hand onto the counter. He stood there breathing hard, looking around like the walls might answer him. Then he went back upstairs. I followed. My mother was at the window with the curtain raised, staring out at the road. My father sat on the edge of the bed and watched her. The candle on the nightstand burned low, throwing huge shapes against the ceiling, and when it finally flickered and died, I felt something shift in the dark, like a door opening in a house with no doors. Nothing happened.
My mother came back to bed without a word. They lay side by side in the blackness, listening to the clock tick. I stood in the corner and watched them, and I think for a little while I almost believed it hadn't worked. Then the stairs creaked. It was a small sound, the kind old houses make when they settle. But it came from the bottom step, and then the next, and the next, and there was a rhythm to it that wood doesn't have on its own. My father sat up. "Margaret," he whispered.
A knock came at the front door. Not loud, polite, almost. A soft rapping, like a neighbor who didn't want to wake the house. My father's breath stopped. "A rat," he said. "A rat in the wall." Another knock, louder this time. Then another. My mother threw off the blankets. "It's Herb," she said. "It's my boy." She ran for the door, but my father was faster. He caught her by the arm and held her while she struggled. "Let me go," she said.
"Don't open it," my father said. His voice was shaking so badly I barely recognized it. "Margaret, please, for God's sake, don't open it. "It's our son," she screamed. The knocking came again, heavy now, shaking the frame. It wasn't one knock anymore. It was many, all at once, from the door and the walls and somewhere deep below the floorboards.
My mother broke free and ran. My father stumbled after her down the stairs, and I went with him, or maybe I was already there. The knocking filled the house like a heartbeat. My mother was at the door, sliding the chain back, pulling the bolt, and outside something was breathing against the wood. My father dropped to his knees in the hallway, pawing at the floor. "Where is it?" he sobbed. "Where is it?" He was looking for the paw. The knocking grew louder, thunderous, and I could hear my mother's voice through it, calling my name, telling me she was coming.
My father's hand closed on the dried little shape where it had fallen behind the radiator. He lifted it to his mouth and shouted over the noise. "I wish him gone," he said. "I wish him dead and gone." The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it hurt. My mother stood with one hand on the bolt, frozen. Then she slid the last bolt free and pulled the door open.
A cold wind rushed through the house, smelling of wet earth and iron. My mother made a sound I never want to hear again, a long wail that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat, and my father pushed past her onto the porch. I went out with him. The yard was empty. The driveway was empty. Under the streetlight at the end of our lane, the road stretched away in both directions, black and shining, without a car or a figure or anything moving as far as I could see.
My father walked to the end of the driveway and stood there in his robe, the paw hanging from his hand. The light above him flickered once and went out. I stood beside him in the dark, close enough to touch, and neither of us said a word.
The story closes here, but the quiet does not. Another night waits on the shelf, its pages already yellowing. When the light is low again, we will return. For now, let the window hold the dark. Let the mirror hold only you. Sleep well, late reader.